Hello, welcome to a Change Gap webinar, How to Unleash Your Desired State. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gustavo Razzetti and I will be your host. Before we get started, a little bit about me. I'm the founder and CEO of Liberationist, a behavior change firm. If I have to define myself in one line, that would be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Change is something that happened across my whole career and I learned a lot from it. I started like a marketing strategist, learning about consumer behavior and what drives people to change. Then I moved on to run different agencies in Argentina, New York, Puerto Rico, LA, Chicago, and so on. And I learned a lot, leading not only from my own mistakes and the things that went well, but also from other people's mistakes and observing them. Then I started working on the innovation field, both with startups and Fortune 500 companies. And if there was something across my career that was constant, is everyone wants to change. Change is exciting. It wants to be better, experiment. But most people get stuck with change. They fear it. And that's why I call the change gap. That tension between where we want to go and where we are now and how to take that leap that gets stuck a lot of organizations. I'm the author of Stretch for Change, a book that helps people prepare to thrive in this ever-changing world. I also write on a regular basis at Medium and other places, and that's a link for you to subscribe if you are interested. At Liberationist, we help leaders ignite and accelerate a culture of change. The first kind of service is to assess and bridge the change gap that I was mentioning before. We also provide specific workshops to help people develop certain skills that are critical to succeed in an ever-changing world, like adaptability, creativity, and resilience. We also help through coaching and consulting to transform personal behaviors and mindset to make people more innovative and more adaptive. For you to understand the kind of projects that we work on, there are 5 key times our clients call on us. So the first is when there's this reigning mentality that this is not the way we do things here. If you don't overcome that mindset, you're not going to be able to grow or to innovate as a company. The second part is to deal with internal resistance or when the speed of adoption is really slow and we need to accelerate it. One of the most critical things when you want to transform an organization is trust. If people don't trust each other, they're never going to be able to experiment and to take risks. That's why we help remove those toxic behaviors and build a safe space for people to be more creative and experimental. Fourth, we know that the same old change management model is not working, and many companies are seeing that they're not being effective into changing people's behavior. So that's why they call us to have a more creative and different approach. And last but not least, many times, one thing that is inhibiting change is a specific lead team when they're not clear among each other or there are some conflicting agendas, and we need to align those so we can then help the rest of the team move forward. Enough introductions. This workshop was designed for you. We're not here to sell, we're here to inspire you and hopefully teach you something. So in order to make this webinar worth your while, I'm going to ask you 3 things. First, be present. Try not to be distracted by phone calls or social media or other things that are going to happen in the next hour. The more you focus, the more you're going to be able to learn things that you're going to apply to your everyday job. Also, reflect. We're not presenting here silver bullets. We're going to give you a framework, some insights, some tools. Reflect on how can you apply those to your everyday work, how they connect to the problems you're dealing in your organization. And third, participate. We're going to open the chat so you can provide questions, share experience, but also learn from others that are part of this webinar. 70% of change initiatives fail, and you don't want to be in that group. In order to be in the 30% of successful change initiatives, we're going to help you and teach you First, to understand why change fails. What are the reasons behind so many failures? Second, we're going to help you how to understand, assess, and solve the change gap in your organization. And last but not least, we're going to walk you through the roadmap, our approach, and tools in order to make this happen. Driving change is anything but easy. Whether you're a CEO or a team member, the change gap is definitely taking a toll on you. When I'm saying this, change drives this tension between where we want to go, the desired state, and the current state that splits people, no? The ones that are ahead and the ones that are behind. But that shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't create this tension between them versus us. What drives you might not drive your team. Different agendas, mindsets, perspectives. The change gap is driven by misunderstandings. Take the case of this CEO. He was pushing too hard to change an organization overnight and felt frustrated. He felt that everyone was moving too slow. Until one day he realized that his frustration was making things worse. This CEO was me. I learned that in order to drive change, both sides need to adjust their behaviors. Change is a collective effort. Let me give you an example about this tension between the current and desired state. This is a true story, so I'm going to tweak a little bit of the details for obvious reasons. But I was invited to Europe to give a speech and run a couple of workshops on change leadership. The client was a hotel chain, one of the largest hotel chains in the world, right? And they invited me to behind the scenes to be part of the rehearsal. And the lead team of the organization was experiencing a little bit of attention regarding how to present their new baby, which was this newly built hotel, the jewel of the crown, something amazing. I was talking about it like it was going to change the world. But the CEO was frustrated. He kept referring as this, hey guys, this is built. We need to do something about it. We need to start planning events. We need to invite our partners. But the point is, the hotel wasn't actually built or finished. It was probably 80%, 85% finished, but it was to be completed yet. And I realized that sometimes leaders turn the 80% of something into 100%. They see the full thing, their dreams come true, while the rest of the people focus on the 20% that needs to be accomplished. And that creates a huge gap. Some people believe maybe they're a little bit more rational or pragmatic, and they believe, we haven't finished it yet, so we shouldn't start doing anything about it. And the CEO believes that 80% is already completed. Let's go, guys, let's do it. So that's basically a typical situation where it's not about information, but each side sees the problem and reality different, and that creates a lot of misunderstanding and tensions when it comes to driving change in an organization. So we're going to do a little exercise here, right? I'm going to draw something. So imagine this line here, black line, represents a, I wouldn't say narrow, but a not so wide gap, right? Start thinking about your organization. Which line, which color represents your current situation? Think about a project that you're working on, a change initiative that you're managing or you have to adopt as a team, right? Which of these colors represents the tension, the divide that's being caused in your place? Is it the black? Is it I can see the other side, we can fix it. Is it blue? Oh, it's something that we need to worry about. Or is it more of a red, very wide gap that you really think that, oh, this is never going to be bridged? So use please the chat line and start sending like, which color is your organization gap today? Is it red, blue, or black? And if you want to share why, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of different answers coming through the chat now. A lot of red, of course, that's no surprise, and blue, black, a little bit of everything, but there's a lot of blue and red definitely. And I see a lot of that. But of course, we're talking just as a preview. I want you to start getting used to this model to figure out, okay, we all know it without doing any research. When we try to think out our own company, we can understand if the gap is a real big one or not so wide. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the reasons why change fails. The first thing is the assumption that we can manage change. And yeah, it's a paradox because we all work in change management and we don't manage change. Yeah, well, we don't. We need to maybe rename how we do or what we do. Maybe it's more about change leadership or change inspirational, because change happens from within. You're dealing with people. People don't want to be changed by others. Change happens from within, and we need to find that right motivation. The second reason why change fails is that people are not objective. I always say that we hire professionals, but their personalities are what show up to work. Yeah, people are their emotions, their beliefs, their passions, their frustrations, whatever happened at home is going to affect the work. The same way that if they don't have a good day at work, they're going to bring that frustration to home. So we need to address them as human beings and understand that those beliefs and emotions affect how they see everything. And this is not something that is an issue that affects employees. It also affects leaders and managers overall. The third reason is not everyone starts from the same point. Imagine that you are the leader of a team or for a company, and you start thinking about a new technology you want to implement. Maybe you're trying to change the way decisions are being made at the company. And you spend, 3 months thinking about it, crafting the solution, you share it with some people, blah, blah. And at some point, you launch it to the whole organization. Maybe after a week, people are not using the new solution that you implemented. And you start feeling frustration. You say, we've been talking about this for 6 months and blah. Reality is, you've been thinking about it 6 months ahead. But most of the people maybe realize about it 3 days ago. So that's a gap that I see all the time, that leaders forget that they start thinking about a new idea months before everyone else get to find out. The fourth reason why change fails is about we forget that change requires a new mindset. Providing a new tool, teaching people how to do design thinking or agile techniques or new technologies are not going to help them become more innovative. We need to train them, we need to coach, we need to change their mindset and beliefs to make sure that they're more open. As I always say, you can buy someone a Formula One car, and that wouldn't turn that person into a Formula One driver, right? There's a huge distance and a huge way to go to make that happen. The fifth reason is making adjustments goes both ways. As I mentioned, the CEO example in Europe, or my personal experience that I thought that people were too slow, well, adjustments need to happen on both sides of the street. I also need to slow down and learn that in order to, I wouldn't say meet people in the middle, but to adjust and promote a behavior that was reachable for most of the team as well. The sixth and last reason is that new doesn't always mean better. So yes, sometimes we're chasing shiny objects, a new app that the IT department developed, but that doesn't mean that people are going to adopt it. Maybe they're not going to see the purpose behind it. Maybe they think, it's good for the company, maybe it's good for the IT manager, but what about me? Every time you're trying to drive change or drive a new initiative, you need to make sure that you're connecting to the what's in it for me. That's what people want to understand before moving forward. So we review the reasons why change fail. And at this point, you're asking yourself, well, why should I care? Well, for starters, this is having a huge economic impact in your organization. McKinsey calculated that 70% of all corporate change initiatives fail. That's a lot of money wasted. 2 out of 3 initiatives don't work. You have to start all over. Also, from a Towers Watson research study, we found out that regular employees believe that 3 out of 10 managers are only fit to help them deal with change. In other words, 7 out of 10 managers are clueless and incapable to help their team deal with uncertainty and all the tensions that change drives. And last, I talk about IT. Well, most IT professionals believe that the key reason, that's 30% of another reason, but the most important reason of IT projects failure is miscommunication. People that are not aligned, lack of clarity of what the project is being driven by, how it's going to apply, how it's going to help the company. So different communication from the get-go and throughout the project. So I'm going to ask you a quick question now, and there's a chat box there that should be visible for everyone. So does your organization measure return on investment? And if you do, how do you do that? Do you mind sharing with the rest of the team using the chat? Okay, we're getting some responses here. We don't measure it. We don't. That's surprising, but not, because actually most organizations don't. We have another answer that says depends on the initiative. In a safety initiative, we use the incident rate, which was tied to an average cost per incident. The other day I was reading a report, and actually like 80% of organizations don't have a return on investment in place that is consistent. And if they do, they don't actually, the ones that do actually don't use it. So you guys are not alone on this. The second part, as I anticipated, we're going to focus on a human-centered approach to change, right? So the first part is how to apply personal development to the workplace. And one thing that for me is really important is I've seen in many companies that the personal aspect, our personal lives and the work are disconnected. And we always hear this, I'm looking for a work-life balance. I always say there's no such a thing as balance, because actually the more we try to find the balance, the less we're going to get it. Why? Our personal life and our professional life are all together. Everything we do is connected. So I think that organizations can be more successful if they bring that personal development, that personal aspect to the workplace, rather than see employees just as professionals. If you try to change your organization, organizations are just an abstract thing. They don't change. What change are people. So you have to deal with people. You need to tap into their specific kind of human behaviors. Like if someone is risk averse at work, in their personal life, that aspect is going to affect how they behave at work. You cannot draw a line between this is personal, this is work, because everything that people are, their beliefs, their emotions, their experiences, if they try to implement change in one company and they got fired or didn't go well, those frustrations are also going to come to play in your current job. The second aspect is we believe that we need to bring a human-centered approach. Someone call it design thinking. They have different tools, but at the end of the day, it's like focus on the human. So see the problem through the eyes of the people and not through the eyes of the company or through the eyes of the management only. In this case, basically, it's about like having a user-centric approach, and our user can be the employees, the stakeholders, CEOs or leaders of the company, managers, etc. So one thing that's important, this human-centered approach is understanding that change is not something perfect. They're not silver bullets. We need to continuously learning using empathy. That's what human-centered design is all about, using the power of empathy to understand and walk in someone else's shoes. It helps leaders better understand their employees and their mindset, but also their employees to understand how CEOs think and behave and why. The third aspect is what I call to prioritize the depth of adoption over breadth. As I tell many clients, it's much better to have 10% of your team fully on board with something than to have everyone in the company just a little bit convinced. And most companies try to convince everyone at once, and that's why they fail. My point is, if you can change a team, you can change the entire organization. And what's more important is this 10% can become your advocates and try to drive adoption by bringing more people to the table. People are going to see that this is a collective effort, not it's just you who's trying to push change forward. We have to prepare our teams before we launch. And why we say this? Because many times we're trying people to adopt something new, a new direction, a new maybe cultures or beliefs that the company stands for, a new product, a new technology, but we just launch it and we don't prepare the people to be ready for absorb that new concept. Sometimes I see a lot of companies that say, Gustavo, help me. I want to turn my company into more innovative. I love doing that. I did that throughout my life. But I can tell you, that's not something that happens overnight by any means. It takes time, it takes effort. So you need to be prepared to first get your team ready before you launch. The fifth point is you need to equip people to outsmart you, not to depend on us. In our case, when we work with clients, that's our approach. I know that a lot of consultants make a lot of money by becoming dependent. So they create a dependency, an addiction that then make them a lot of money. In our case, we want to help people like a sports coach, help them play at their best on their own terms. So we're not going to bridge the gap for them. We're going to help them bridge and prepare them to do on their own terms. Getting a little bit more into our framework, we found out that there was the need for this kind of tool to help organizations, first of all, to align the perceptions between the different players, to help them move from where we are today, our current state, and what's the desired state, the state that a CEO, a leader, a team manager, or team leader has defined for the whole group, and also to solve the root problem. So many times when people say, my team are moving slower than I wish, or they're not adopting this new communication tool, those are just symptoms. In our case, we focus on what's driving that lack of adoption. Why are people moving slower? Why are they not talking to each other? And focus on the real human cause. And fourth, of course, to build a culture of change, which is what everyone wants to do, a culture that is more experimental, more open to change, and more agile. This chart presents a little bit of the framework that we develop, and this is a process. I like the cycle aspect of it. It moves from one place to another. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it starts where, okay, you need to understand the problem, then explore a solution and then implement it. But depending on where you are on the adoption curve or the problem, you might start on different situations or moments. And what we're trying to see with this is change is like a cycle. So it's a continuous thing. So the moment we always say in innovation, when you solve a problem, you create a new one. Why? Because let's say that you get people to adopt this, that's going to drive a new consequence, a new problem that you need to fix. So there's always going to be a gap that you have to fix or solve in your company. The first part, as I mentioned, is about understanding. And understanding has to do with two aspects of it. The first one is the assessment. Normally, when we use this tool, the Change Canvas tool, we ask organizations to do their own assessment. So basically to understand, okay, where are you now? Where do you want to be? What are the things what are the tensions, the conflict, the divide, and what's driving those? To have some initial hypothesis as a starting point. The second part is what we call the empathize, or to use empathy research to better understand the multiple perspectives of employees, stakeholders, leaders, and so on and so forth. Through this empathy, we're able to revisit and see if the initial assessment is right, what are the tensions, what can be addressed. The second part, which is the exploration, consists on two parts. The first is, as I mentioned before, once you got all those insights from empathy research, we're going to use those insights to reframe the problem. Most of the times when we start, and I'm going to share some examples later, when we start with a problem, what the CEO sees is not necessarily the problem. It's just symptoms, or maybe it's how the CEO sees the problem. By talking to other members and employees, we get to see a more amplified perspective, and we can reframe the problem into what the real one is. And then once we have a clarity on the problem that we want to solve when it comes to change, we're going to work on what we call the minimum viable change. And this requires a slide of its own. The minimum viable change is a term that we coined to basically refer to this small dose of behavior change that can drive early adoption. Once again, this is not about creating a huge initiative and get everyone to build it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have large initiatives. What I'm saying is, like, sometimes it's better to pick one piece of that initiative and try to drive adoption and then you can build on that. We're borrowing this term from basically startups that have the minimum viable product, which is a basic version of a new product, no, with less functionality that many startups use to test and validate their hypothesis. So this is exactly what we want to do with change. When you're launching a new initiative within your company, start with a small bite, a small dose that can help you first drive early adoption, but also most importantly, it can be easy to implement. So the more complicated to implement an initiative, the harder it's going to be for people to buy into it. Also, if you can create a quick impact, that's great, because then people are saying, oh, this initiative is working, and then you get more advocates and you can scale that initiative moving forward. But also, if you commit to a large solution, which you don't know if it's going to work, you might be putting a lot of effort, money, and time behind it. And then what are you going to do when it doesn't work? By starting with a minimum viable change, you can learn a lot about how people react to it, implementation issues, cost that maybe you didn't anticipate, and so on and so forth, before you start growing that from minimum viable change to a larger solution. And the last part, of course, is about implementation. So if you have a minimum viable change, you would put it in place. Many times we work with clients and we implement a change within a group. Could be a functional group, a multidisciplinary group, to see what happens, to learn, validate hypotheses, refine before we scale it. No, as we always said, before scaling to a larger group or even the larger organization, nail the solution first. Make sure you have the right solution, and only then, when everything has been tested and improved, start with a scale. Most companies fail because they scale too fast and without validating the basis of the new solution, and then they waste a lot of money, of course. This is for you now. Like, we've been talking about many things, but we've been talking about the minimum viable change. So think about any project that you're working currently in your company, and how could you apply that notion of MVC? So could be a project that you're leading personally, that you're being part of, or whatever. Think about any project within your company and share in the chat, like, how can you apply that notion of MVC? Like, it could be, oh, I'm working on this large initiative. Maybe I should start it earlier with smaller chunks. Like, share your thoughts and ideas with the team, please. And once again, we're looking for initial thoughts. So you don't have to come with something, wow, but I'm inviting you to reflect on how you operate and how you can bring this concept to your company. So we have an answer here that in tech initiatives, evaluating the real user experience, align empathy towards one team member to another. So great. That's kind of the mentality. Excellent. So that's perfect. So we're going to continue. We have more answers coming in the chat. You can read those whenever you want. So as I anticipated, the third part of this webinar is about the toolkit, and this is what we call the change gap canvas. There's a lot of things and tools that we have within this. I'm going to put now a link that you can use to download, if you want, for free, these tools. There's a sign up now bottom there. Hopefully you can see it. And you can use that to download the toolkit. There are 4 tools that we have, and I'm going to start explaining those in a second. So basically, the purpose of this change gap canvas, as I mentioned, is not just to see, this is where we want to go and this is where we are, but most importantly is going deeper. As you can see on that cliff, who's on one side, who's on the other side, what are the expectations that are driving those who are leading change versus the beliefs of those who don't want to change or are having a hard time. This phrase kind of summarizes it all. So clarity equals speed. In any organization, if people are not clear on what do you want to achieve, in how you want to achieve it, and why, then nothing's going to happen. So clarity is important, it's critical for an organization. And basically the gap, it's the other way around. The gap is anything but clear. So as I mentioned before, the motivation, the mindsets are not aligned. So how can we solve for that? This change gap is mostly created by misunderstandings, right? But not just miscommunication. It can be driven by vision. It can be driven by the accountability of who does what, who is responsible for what. It can be driven by speed, that we're not moving at the speed that we would like to. Depending on the reason that's driving that gap, we need to see how we can address it and solve for it. There's something really interesting. There's a study that says that only 29% of employees can correctly identify their company's strategy. That means that most people are not aligned probably with the company strategy, not because they don't want to, but because they are not even clear on what that strategy is all about. And I see this all the time. Leaders think that everyone knows and are clear, and people say, no one has told me, I don't understand what we stand for as a company, and so on and so forth. We need to understand these tensions that are creating this divide. As I mentioned, the expectations. So CEOs, as I mentioned with this guy from Europe, he was seeing this hotel already finished. He had this expectation that people should start like running events and using it and calling their partners to show them this new diamond of the crown, jewel of the crown, because he was so happy. But actually, the hotel wasn't finished. So it was an expectation that he had. The beliefs from people say, this is never going to be finished. It's going to take more time. So we have one reality and two positions that none of those were actually objectives. The CEO was more on the optimistic side, and the other guys were more on the pragmatical and maybe a little bit pessimist or conservative side. So how can we solve for that and align those beliefs rather than saying that some people are right and the other ones are wrong? As I mentioned, this is a team responsibility, and everyone has their own responsibility in moving this forward. So this image that you're seeing here is how the Change Canvas tool actually works. Normally, you print it out in a large format, tabloid or even larger, to fill it in with all the information. But I'm going to walk you through how it works and how you can start to think about it in terms of your company today. The first thing that you need to do is to focus on one change initiative. So this is not, if you're going to focus on one canvas, choose one challenge and build a canvas for that challenge. If you're running 2 or 3 change initiatives, build one canvas per each initiative. The first thing is we're going to try to understand the big tension. What's the current state and what's the desired state? Let's say that I want to drive people to become more agile in making decisions and becoming more independent and don't consult me as the leader as much. Well, that would be the desired state. And where are they? The current state could be people are afraid of making decisions. They don't know that they have the power. They made bad decisions in the past and people punish them, whatever. So try to understand what's the gap that's holding them. Then you want to work on the right column, which is who's ahead. So who's ahead could be sometimes not necessarily a leader, could be one employee within a team. Try to identify if it's a person, a group, certain people within the company that are ahead of the curve when it comes to being closer to the desired state. Fill up their expectations. What do they expect others to do and act and whatever in terms of behaviors, in terms of beliefs? And how do tensions manifest? So basically, these guys could be frustrated because people are not taking ownership. They keep repeating people, hey, you don't do this. And instead of helping people move forward, they're just making them feel ashamed or disengaged. Once you complete all these right column, you're going to go to the left and do the same, but for the other team. So who is behind? Is a person, a team, most of the organization? Is as particular, the people have been in a company for 30 years. What's the group that's behind that change that you're trying to implement? What are their beliefs? Their beliefs are really important because basically our emotions are holding those people back. So maybe they think that the company has been very successful in the past, so they don't need to change. Whatever is the case. And then once again, what are the tensions and how do those tensions manifest? Sometimes could be through disengagement, sometimes can be through blaming the CEO, whoever's driving the change, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, we're going to focus on the why. And this is about taking the leap, because the why is hypothesis, is try to understand what's underneath those tensions that are not necessarily bringing those two parts together. Just for your reference, this is another part of the tool. I'm not expecting you to read all this stuff, but this is a companion of the other tool that has all the questions to help you and guide you throughout the process. So what are the things that you need to ask yourself to answer and fill each of these buckets to understand how you're doing when it comes to the change gap? So now I want to share a real example. Of course, I have to tweak it a little bit. I was hired to work with an organization in the education space. Think about a university, if you like. And basically, when I talked to the CEO and the CEO of the company, who were the ones ahead, their expectations were like, oh, these guys, talking about the organization, the overall team, they're behaving like this is a non-for-profit. They don't care about revenue. I want everyone to embrace a revenue-driven mentality. That was basically the expectation of the CEO. No? She would say, these guys don't get it. They don't know how to run a business. They don't care about making money. They need to help me. In terms of how that tension manifests, first, the CEO blamed everyone else. So she believed that she was right and perfect, and everyone else wasn't there. She said that everyone were backstabbers, that were attacking each other. They didn't work as a team. They didn't collaborate. And most importantly, she believed that people didn't want to play hard. They didn't that they lack drive or they lack ambition. They didn't want to move forward. So basically that the bar was too low. If we move to the other side of the gap or the cliff, in this case, everyone else. So there were two people in the organization with one that were close to the desired state and the rest was on the other side, which is not good at all. And they believe, people on the left side believe that the company was successful. So, when things are going well, why should we change? So they didn't agree on that. First, the way the CEO talked to the people make them feel that she wasn't acknowledging how successful the company has been in the past. That doesn't mean that they couldn't do better, but if that normally creates a lot of tension between teams because they feel dismissed by, in this case, the CEO. On the other hand, their core beliefs, because of what this organization stood for, people believe that our role is about educating people, not to make money. They didn't have an issue about not making money, but for them, their passion, everything that excited them as employees and professionals was to educate and move forward that agenda. The tensions, these guys believe that the company wasn't clear on what they stand for. So they didn't know if this was an evolution of where they are, or they actually were dropping we care about education and we're just a money-making machine from now on. They believe that the CEO didn't trust them. So you know what? If she doesn't trust us, why are we going to trust her? And why are we going to follow her advice or direction? So trust is the baseline for any relationship, especially work. And the other thing is people were afraid to get fired. So she was being so aggressive and dismissive of her team that people say, you know what, we're going to get fired. So some were thinking about finding a new job or they were completely disengaged. So as you can see, when you don't address the core reasons of the change gap, the gap tends to widen and gets even worse. So trying to summarize some of the hypotheses is first, both sides were taking the opposition or different perspective as negative. So the employees were seeing the CEO perspective, making money as something negative, and the CEO was seeing education as something negative, right? To try to integrate both and see how they can collaborate and work together. There was clearly a lack of transparency, bad communication, but most importantly, there was lack of this psychological safety. So people didn't feel safe to express their opinions, to talk to her, and they were kind of checked out. And also, as I mentioned, the top-down pressure, and I've done that before, that mistake. When you put a lot of pressure, instead of getting people to be more open, they just get the opposite reaction. People shut down. So there's another tool that you're going to receive if you sign up for the toolkit, which is the change gap statement. And we use this once we do the initial assessment. Then we go and do empathy interviews with employees, managers, and leaders and validate those hypotheses. We try to capture all that in a simple format to help us understand what's the real change gap. Once again, I tweak this out of confidentiality. We're trying to help you understand, for the example I was sharing before, how this would work. So the desired state, the company wants to move from having a non-profit mentality to grow revenue and services. So not just making money, but also creating more offering. The change tension was the C-level of the company expected revenue to be the number one goal of the company. And there was a contradiction because everyone else think that education was their number one goal. So that's the huge tension that we need to address. So how we define the change gap? Well, we need to turn the vision, this new vision of, okay, money matters and we need to grow, into an innovative and collaborative education organization to solve for the them versus us and the lack of trust that the company was suffering from. What I'm saying, this innovative collaboration is like, if she said, we want to be more innovative, for someone that is in the education space, that could be interesting because they're curious, they want to learn, and that could bring them together. But also, and we helped them with this a lot and was really, really successful, how to bring their voices together and through collaboration, help them also create new products, create not out of pressure, but out of passion. So recapping this, driving change is not easy, as we mentioned throughout the course. The change gap is basically this tension between where you want to go, the desired state, and where you are. But once again, this is not just a fact or reality check. It's more understanding the mindsets, the belief, and going deeper, applying empathy to see what's driving this tension. The behavior change goes both ways. So it's a collective transformation, not just leaders asking the rest of the people to transform. We're on the same boat. We all need to work towards this. But also, change happens from within, so you cannot force it. You need to inspire people, you need to give them the tool, but also connect this change opportunity with something that resonates to them, as I mentioned on the education example, and reframe the gap through empathy. Empathy, it's basically what Sam solved and what helps bring a more human and bring people at the core of what we do to move change initiatives forward. Okay, so if you want to bridge the change gap in your organization, we already share the link for you to download the tools. You have it here again. And also that's our email. If you have any questions, if you want to have anything that you'd like to discuss with us. But also we're doing a special offer for the participants of this webinar that we're going to give you, if you're interested, you can sign up now, and we're going to give you a 30-minute free consultation to talk about how the change gap is present in your organization, how it's affecting your company, and give you some hints. So you can sign up now if you like, and I'm going to leave the offer for a second. I want to thank you all for joining us and being part of the workshop. And you can now go into the chat again to share any questions or comments or feedback that you might have with me or with the rest of the team. So thank you again for being part of the webinar. Hope you learn. Remember to download the tools, and please share whatever feedback or questions you have now using the chat tool. I'm getting a question here about a lot of thank you, but also diversity. Yeah. Diversity is very important. It's a lot of gaps. Well, I think I already addressed all the questions and comments. Thank you for all the kind words. I hope you enjoy. And once again, this is Gustavo Razzetti from Liberationist, and I want to thank you so much for being part of our webinar, and have an amazing day. Bye.